Hello. Okay, we're back with part 4 of talking about the circle of knowledge. I made 3 videos about this the other day and posted it up. And it's been a day or two since I made one, but I wanted to kind of continue on from where I was at. And I'm just doing this off the cuff. It's not really planned. I don't really know what I'll say yet, or I'm just kind of going at it and making some content. But yeah, we want to talk about the next parts of the circle. And I'm going to do a quick recap just to get myself back in the mode and back on track, or for anyone else who might have just clicked into this one and not seen the others yet. So yeah, this is part 4, and I'm talking about this circle of knowledge, which is an infographic that I developed over time to relate all the topics of knowledge kind of subjectively, or, in a word map sense, like geographically, like where they live in relation to each other, kind of like a word cloud. But I did this with some specific requirements, very few, but some specific requirements that then generated this output over time. And so really this whole chart, this whole graphic comes from these 8 pillar topics. And that was the part 1. I talked about physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, sociology, arts and crafts, symbology, language, and math. And that's it. And those topics, placing them 8, spaced evenly around the circle, 1/8 each, and why they're where they are. And then there's a natural kind of law or order where on scale you lead from physics, which is all scale from smallest to biggest, to chemistry, biology, psychology, and you just go right around until you kind of come back to no scale, which is just language and math or something. And it's kind of an abstracted concept or symbols and other stuff. But so we talked about that in part 1, which is these 8 pillar words and, why and how they came about and where they are. Okay, and so you start with that. And then part 2 was saying, well, now how do we start generating all these other words and where do they come from? And the first obvious thing you can do is say, well, what's the cross between physics and chemistry? Well, that would be physical chemistry or material science. So you see that that's here in tier 2. And then what's the difference, what's the cross between biology and chemistry? Well, that's biochemistry. So pretty obvious, or biology and psychology is neuroscience. So in part 2, we talked about what happens when you just take that premise of the 8 words that you started with and saying, well, what would naturally live at their intersection? And we placed those words slightly in. So then also, once we had the 8 points, we matched each point to every other point to create these intersections, obviously. And I thought that was a good starting place just to say, well, how long is it going to take me to fill all these in, and what words end up in each place and whatnot. And this project's been going on for 15 to 18 years. And so over time, things have settled into better and better places. But there were times when these words were not in the best of places. But, the more you make concrete, the more it kind of forces other words to do certain things or go where they go. So part 1 was the 8 pillar words. Part 2 was saying, okay, let's just cross them and see what we get. And part 3, you might hear my cats. The cats where I'm staying, actually, but they were just about ready to fight in the background. In any case, part 3 was we started talking about some of the words on the outside of the circle. And the words that we talked about on the outside were these colored words that were right by the circle. There's 16 of them. And what those words represent is the heart or the core of each topic. So when you think of physics, what is physics about? If somebody said to me, what's physics about? I would say, waves and particles. And that's kind of the heart or core of each topic. And I use that model, or I use that concept because the atom itself made me think of like, a nucleus with something surrounding it. Or the cell, in biology has a cell nucleus with the cell material surrounding it, the cell wall and all that other stuff. And so I thought, well, for each topic, you kind of have the core of that topic, and then everything else is the periphery of that topic. And we're going to get into that a little bit more here in part 4. But part 3 was talking about these core topics. The core of physical chemistry is atoms. The core of a neuroscience is a mind or a nervous system, things like that. The core of culture is a group of people or a group of individuals. So now we're going to move on to part 4. And what are we going to talk about here in part 4? So I want to talk about some of these generalizations on the outside, but I don't feel we're quite ready for that yet, because they come about from understanding, well, now what's in each pie section or what's in each slice of this circle. And at this point, you get the idea of where we're going with this. You're crossing the two outside words to get the second level word. But then you say, well, how do you start generating more and more of these inside words? Well, you just start throwing them in over time and squeezing them and saying, oh, that word doesn't really feel right there. Oh, that word goes over here, or that word goes over there. But you can do a little bit better. And so we're going to talk on part 4 here. We're going to talk more about these inside words. And then part 5, I'll probably get to the sliced words on the outside and some of the real rest of the generalizations. Because then by then it will become kind of evident what's going on with these generalizations, and specifically the alchemical words. Because part of this chart, you'll notice, has a very alchemical feel to it with all the elements on here. And so I'll get to that probably in part 5 or part 6. But for the rest of this video, let's do part 4. Let's talk about some more of these words on the inside. Specifically, I think the next best place for you to start is, once you notice you have these crosswords from two topics on the outside, like language and math and physics is systemization, or theoretical physics, if you want to think about it that way. You do that over here for physics and chemistry. You see physical chemistry like we did in part 2 and all that. But your next choice would be to say, well, what should be between those? What should be between systemization and physical chemistry? And when you do, the one right in the middle, you realize that you're just moving in from physics. And you say, well, what about this dot here? What about this dot here? Or what about this dot here? So you're looking at these words as you move in. And you realize that, this immediately jumps to the question of, well, what would be in the center of the circle? Or what is happening as you move in? Well, obviously, as you move in, you're combining more and more of these 8 outside words. So, physics and chemistry puts me something here, but now I add in some biology. That might put me more towards the center of chemistry in. Now, if I throw in some psychology down here, maybe that would move everything even more towards this way. And so you'll notice that topics, as you get more and more towards the center of the circle, they become more and more complex in a sense of like they are really, their ingredients are all these 8 things out around the outside, but they tend to still lean towards the topic that they're in that, octant. They're in that bigger pie slice of that circle. So you start to looking at it from a geometry point of view. If physics is over here, then this whole kind of corner of the circle is the physics corner, or physics slice. And if chemistry is over here, this whole slice here is the chemistry slice. Or you could ask yourself, where does something start and stop? So if you don't want it to be quite the whole slice, because by the time you get back to here, it's not quite the whole slice, you're back towards physics. Mostly physics. This is 100% physics, and maybe if you move off this part a little bit, you're at 99% physics, 1% chemistry, or something like that. And you can kind of put this into eighths and say, oh, the physics slice is this slice here, from systemization to the center over to physical chemistry in the center. Material science is more chemistry than it is physics. So we're going to say that the whole physics octant or eighth is kind of this slice here. The chemistry then would be this slice to this slice here. And you're just splitting the difference between these two. And you say, okay, well, this stuff all over here should be physics. How do we start filling it in? And I think, like I said, the next best place to start is some of these middle ones right in the center of physics. Now, we know the heart of physics is waves and particles. But what's like a bigger general way of things that we think about when we start thinking about physics, or chemistry or any of these? And what should go in this next dot that is like the heart of each thing, but a little bit more just the center of the whole topic, in relation to all other topics? What's a more generalization than just what's at the heart of it? So these words on the outside, the part 3 at that point, was what's the heart or core of the things. But now in this part 4, we're going to talk more about these. What is just the generalization of that topic as you move in towards including all other ingredients in what you're talking about from subject point of view, or all these other pillars. So you'll notice that the groupings, there's a main word or two in each of these centers that I've eventually figured out over time. And the words kind of represent the eighths of the circle and related to the physics. So like you said, physics can be kind of from here to here, this octant. But now I said, when I think about physics, that's a lot of the earth and space sciences. In school, you always talk about things like environmental sciences and earth science, and that's related to physics. And space and astronomy is obviously physics. And, thermodynamics, meteorology, oceanography, all those are earth sciences, geology. So you realize that one way to think of physics is indeed space and earth. Earth being matter and material. We're going to get to that too, because you see earth over here as the actual element. But just in the sense of, like, typically in school, what you call the earth and space sciences, you'll notice that a nice thing starts to happen with all these other words that have been placed over time, where this eighth up here, this pie slice between language and math and physics, this is all the space stuff. From the physics side of it, it has to do with, like, actual outer space or space and the idea of space in physics and taking up space and volume and all that. From the math side of it, it's kind of like, well, what is space, geometry, calculus, topology, the space side of math, if you will. But you'll notice that, again, this space and earth, and I put it this way, these words on the circle are specific in that I try to really get them honed in to, I didn't say earth and space here because earth would kind of hint that it was on this part and space was down here. It's space because space is closer to this side, and earth, meaning earth is closer to this side. Same way, if I list things on a certain circle, like here I have printing, journalism, network systems, it's not just that they all live at this circle. I've very specifically and meticulously said, okay, printing must be closer to this side, journalism's closer to the middle, and the network system is closer to whatever is on its side over here. So things are specifically listed at a location in order of kind of where they live if you were to say, well, which part of the circle is that closest to? So, okay, doing that, we're going to go through these here. And I'm going to check my time from the other day just to see. This introduction was a bit long. I've got about 8 to 10 minutes. So let's go from here. So you'll see that here you see space and earth, and that's kind of like what's the generality of physics? It's earth and space sciences, with the space stuff ending up being over here more, and the earth stuff is all over here. Now, for chemistry, you end up having the heart is the molecule, but the middle of chemistry is kind of organic chemistry. And the same way that the atom split the difference between physics and chemistry, chemistry starts at atoms and things bigger than it, but physics also includes things smaller than atom. So atom is kind of like the start of chemistry. And we're going to say the chemistry slice is from here over to here, from atom to cell. That's mostly chemistry. And I'm getting ahead a little bit with these outside generalizations, but you'll notice that the middle of chemistry separates that which is inorganic from organic. And so I have organic here because that's kind of where the organic starts, in the middle of chemistry. But as soon as you get off organic, you see like material science and physical and stoichiometry and stuff. So this is all your inorganic chemistry would be over here, material science and stuff. But as soon as you get on this side, you've got your organic chemistry over here. So the organic chemistry here, I could have put inorganic above it and then organic below it. Maybe I'll change it to that. This line here kind of represents the part where that changes from inorganic to organic. Okay, for biology, well, what's the heart of biology? And for the main 4 of these corners, biology, physics, sociology, and symbology, I tried to come up with like a space and earth kind of feeling word. For the other ones, it just kind of has like one word there. For the ones in between, you have organic chemistry here, or something. But so, okay, for biology, it's plants and animals. That's biology is plants and animals. That's the real generalization of what biology is about. And on the plant side, you see stuff over here that's more plants, because that's coming from your beginnings of your organic chemistry. You lead to things like, again, I said it in one of the other videos, like amoebas and protozoa and euglena, things that are, they take in light in the day like a plant, but they eat single-celled organisms at night. And that's like a plant animal. Or like a virus. A virus they changed it a little bit. When I was in school, there was 4 criteria for life. I think now they have 5, or they simplified it to 3, or whatever. But at that time, like something like a virus, these protein chains, viruses meet the criteria for three aspects of life, but not 4. They don't quite, I forget what the 4th one was that they didn't meet. But the idea is that you move from the organic chemistry into plants, and then from plants into animals. And plants aren't, don't really have a nervous system. They have a chemical nervous system in a sense, But we think of more of a nervous system as having all the organs and organelles and stuff. And as you get towards psychology, people could say, well, it's the psychology of a plant. Does it think? Does it feel? Does it move towards light? Does it do all these things? But generally, that's associated for animate organisms that walk around, And so biology is plants and animals, going from plants to animals. And then for psychology, you'll see thinking and reasoning. That's kind of the heart of psychology, is thinking and reasoning. And again, on this side, you have stuff that's more just about neuroscience and what it actually means to be conscious and cognizance and of itself. How are you even aware? How does something become self-aware? And the root things tied to emotions and instincts, not things you've conditioned, not things, this is where you're just, your biology is reacting still because you're coming from biology. So that's on this side of psychology. Where over here, you get more of that thinking part, more of the, well, how have you been conditioned? You see conditioning starts to come over here. And then here, how are you thinking? And then how do you learn? Or what's your philosophy and your education? Other things like that. So that's psychology. Sociology is about groups and people. And again, this side is more about the people. The single ideas and individuals coming from psychology. And how do they learn and think? And just about the single side of things. Whereas you get over here, you get more and more into groups. And how are flags and states and nations and commerce and business and economics and stuff. So you go from the individual, the idea, the thoughts, the idea, the individual, the group. So sociology is groups and people. Okay. Arts and crafts. Now on this one, I didn't quite split it here. I said, okay, it's a works or a product. You can see some of these outside words, aesthetic and affluence. So for arts and crafts, again, I don't have the two split, like groups and people or plants and animals. Same with here, it's just organic chemistry. But you'll notice the same trend happening where it splits on each side of these. You'll notice here that I think trends and traditions is a good way to think about it. Whereas the stuff that's more about tradition and culture and anthropology and where you're coming from, heritage, and the things of the group, that's on this part. And this side of arts and crafts, I think I didn't put it because it splits itself, arts and crafts. This is the craft side over here, and this is the art side over here. That's what I meant to say. So you'll notice here is all your art and here's all your crafts, basically. Then, let's see. For symbology, this is split into expression and reference. So on this one, you'll notice that the expression part is more still connected to the art, or how do you express something, and icons and pictures and sounds and things like that. Folklore, dance, self-expression. So this is the expression side. Whereas as you get more and more back to that no scale and just completely analytical and analysis and symbols and logic, you start to get into the reference side. So out of symbols, you'll notice these are all the expression symbol stuff, and this is all the reference stuff over here. And then lastly, we get back to language and math, which kind of splits itself the way arts and crafts do. You'll see that language is more over here, and math starts to get more over to physics, if you will. But you could also look at it here like logic and analysis is another good way, because this is the core logic, set theory, semantics, things like that is what determines your actual logic system of those symbols. How do they relate? Machine code, things like that. But as you start to get to building your model and creating not just a model, but a whole system, then you start to get into analysis of all that logic, and the output of what does it result in. And so I'm going to check my time again real quick. 20 minutes. This is a good place to stop. I kind of feel like this was just a little bit of a filler video or trying to get me back on track. I'm going to record 1 or 2 more of these after this tonight and go on to part 5 or 6 or however many parts we need. But so part 1 was the outside words. Part 2 was the combining of those. Part 3 was saying what's the core of each outside word that we had. Now part 4 is mostly just saying, okay, well, these are your generalizations as you move in. You start to realize what these 8 octants end up being about. So I think on part 5 now, I'm not going to go through every word on here because they're just topics that I started filling in over time and shuffling them until I realized generalizations of each intersection here. But maybe on part 5, we'll talk about some of the other inner words as well as now some of these other outside words. And then I think part 6, I'll do all the other generalizations or something like that. So let's end this here. This is a little longer than I wanted, but it gets me back into making these. If you enjoyed this or you haven't seen the first 3 parts, you can go back and watch those. It explains some of the basics. And if you're interested, we'll go on to part 5, and that'll be up here soon. And we can talk more about the circle. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Have a great day.